The Baptist understanding of the relationship between the covenants is truly our defining theological commitment. This Baptist hermeneutic, that distinct change from Old Covenant to New Covenant, gives rise to Baptist theology and practice as it pertains to baptism, communion, polity, and the role of the state. Hey guys, Joe here, back to the Word, and in this video we are covering Baptist covenantal foundations, the Baptist hermeneutic, Old and New Covenant relationship. This is part 4 of my series and the final video in the series on Baptist foundations. Very excited for this series and to share it with you guys. The full series playlist, which has 4 content videos and an introduction, is linked in a playlist below in the description of this video. If you want to watch the whole thing, including the entry video on why I did this series, what provoked me to do it, and why I think it was an important topic to study and to share with all of you. The major sections of this video are timestamped, so you can hop ahead to the section that most interests you. But in this video, we are going to cover a series recap, what got us to this point in the series, and kind of briefly touch on what the other videos had and moved us to this point. Then the defining theological commitment that makes Baptists Baptist. Then we'll get into Baptist views on nature of the Old Covenant versus nature of the New Covenant, different types of Baptist covenantalism. So we're going to discuss 4 in this video. First being dispensational theology, then covenant theology or federal theology, and then some middle course views. We're going to discuss new covenant theology and progressive covenantal theology. And then I'm going to wrap up with some recommended resources for deeper study if you want to go deeper into any of these topics that I'm sharing in this video. Just a reminder that this entire series was kind of inspired and is built upon this book right here, The Baptist Vision, Faith and Practice for a Believer's Church by Matthew Y. Emerson and R. Lucas Stamps. So you love this series, you've enjoyed watching the videos, I would encourage you to pick up this book. Really excellent. This video specifically is from their Baptist Foundation section and their chapter on the Baptist hermeneutic. And so that's what this is built upon for the entire video. So I've taken that chapter, summarized it. You see it right there in the notes. You can pause, read my summary of the chapter. I've gone through the chapter, pulled some of the major elements out, built upon them, and I will be sharing that with you guys in this video specifically. So before we get into that content, I do want to do a brief series recap for those who might be just hopping in on this video and want to know what we've covered up to this point. So we started out the series with the introduction video, which talked about what makes Baptist Christians, Baptist foundations, and why doing this study matters. And I also introduced in that video the metaphor of a tree and what was going to set up the 4 subsequent content videos. And so we talked about starting at the trunk, and we covered Baptist Catholic, lowercase c, meaning universal church foundations. So those are theological beliefs that Baptists with a capital B would articulate and hold to as a broad movement, and would have in concert and would have in common and articulate and hold to, that would also be held by all Christians living in all places at all times. And so specifically we talked about the Trinity and also Christology, Christ, his person and work, and the gospel message and the basic gospel message in that video. Then we move farther up the tree where Catholic or the Roman Catholic Church split from the Protestant Reformation, and we talked about how Baptists are reformational Protestants. And so we talked about how Baptists would hold to a sola scriptura view and also justification by faith alone. Not all Baptists as a movement are Calvinistic, so capital R Reformed in their soteriology. Some are general and hold a general view of the atonement, but Baptists as a whole movement are reformational Protestants. Then we got into part 3, which was Baptist Evangelical foundations, and we talked about how Baptists in their articulation of the gospel of Jesus Christ and its implications for life and social action fall within the broader camp of evangelicalism as a theological global renewal movement. And so that was part 3. And now we arrived at part 4, Baptist covenantal foundations, the Baptist hermeneutic. So how we interpret the Bible and see the relationship between the Old Covenant and the new covenant and how that makes us distinctively Baptist, or what others would label us as Baptist. So, moving into the defining theological commitment, this quote from the Emerson and Stamps book up front to set up where we're going in this video. The Baptist understanding of the relationship between the covenants is truly our defining theological commitment. This Baptist hermeneutic, that distinct change from Old Covenant to New Covenant, gives rise to Baptist theology and practice as it pertains to baptism, communion, polity, and the role of the state. So the question is, what do Baptists believe about the relationship between the nature of the Old Covenant and the nature of the New Covenant? So Baptist views on the nature of the Old Covenant versus nature of the New Covenant are covered in Emerson and Stamps' book on page 51 and 52, and I've summarized it for you, and you'll see it in the notes on the side. And what I'm doing with this summary is really not trying to bridge the gap. I'm just trying to tell you this is how Baptists would articulate and see the nature of the Old Covenant and the nature of the New Covenant, and then we'll get into the covenantal views that kind of bridge and show how they relate. So first, nature of the Old Covenant, so covenant entry and sign of entry. Entry into the Old Covenant was not by faith, but by physical birth. And circumcision was the physical sign of this covenant. That's how it's articulated in Emerson and Stamps' chapter, and that's broadly how most Baptists would articulate the covenant entry and sign under the Old Covenant. Then we get into visible body. The law given at Sinai and again on the plains of Moab governed both the spiritual and social life of Israel, but not all Israel was faithful to those laws. This was in part because Israel was a mixed body made up of believers and unbelievers. Then we get to nature of the covenant was a shadow of the new covenant with physical and local realities. And then covenant fulfillment. When Jesus came, he fulfilled all the covenant promises of the Old Testament. And because he was the perfect obedient Israel, keeping and fulfilling the Old Covenant, he ushers in a new covenant. So that's the nature of the Old Covenant as articulated by Baptists as a movement. Then nature of New Covenant. So now giving you the idea over here, covenant entry, those who are united to Christ by faith are now part of the covenant people of God, the new Israel, made up of both Jews and Gentiles. Entrance into the covenant people is no longer by physical birth, but by faith. So spiritual new birth. The sign of entry into that new covenant people, the sign of entry changed from a physical sign, circumcision, to a spiritual sign, baptism. The sign of baptism is still material, but also transcends that to signify a spiritual movement of the baptized person from spiritual death to eternal new life in Christ. Visible body, so the nature of the church and the gathered people of God under this new covenant. The chapter does not get into this here, but a distinctive belief of Baptists is that in the new covenant, the visible church is not a mixed body like Israel was, but a body of believers. So you want to see believers' baptism section in Emerson and Stamps' book for what they articulate about that and how Baptists articulate a visible body view. Unbelievers are welcome to attend worship and respond to the gospel, but membership in the church and participation in the ordinances of the church, so baptism and the Lord's Supper, are for born-again believers only. Nature of the new covenant. The fully realized new covenant promised in the Old Testament with spiritual and global realities brought by the person and work of Jesus Christ. So that's the nature of the new covenant as articulated by Baptists. So now we get into different types of Baptist covenantalism. So nature of the Old Covenant, nature of the New Covenant. How do Baptists see them related? 4 covenantalism views are going to be talked about in this video and are talked about in Emerson and Stamps' book. So first, a quote from Emerson and Stamps to set the table. Baptists have articulated this relationship between the covenants in various ways. So 4 of them discussed in this video. First up, the brief overview of dispensational theology. Beginning in the 19th century, the 1800s, this framework has provided the basic framework for thinking about the biblical covenants. So the primary emphasis of this view, so the dispensational theology view is placed upon the discontinuity between the Old Testament Israel and the New Testament church. So these two dispensations don't mark out two different systems of salvation, so that's important to make. So we're not marking out two distinct systems of salvation, one by faith and one by works, but two distinct peoples of God. So you have ethnic, geopolitical Israel, what's sometimes called ENT Israel, so ethnic, national, and territorial Israel, and the predominantly Gentile church. Another key facet of dispensationalism is that the promises made to Israel in the Old Testament must have literal fulfillments for Israel as a nation state. It's also worth noting that in Emerson and Stamp's chapter, they go on to get more into distinctives of dispensational views and acknowledge variations between classic, modified, and progressive dispensationalism. And then they have a note there, see Irwin and Perry after dispensationalism for an introduction that is both charitable and critical of this view. And so I'll recommend that book in the resource section of this video. You can get more details about it. There's way more to dig into it, but the summary right there is the dispensational theology covenantalism view that some Baptists hold see a strong discontinuity between the Old Testament / the Old Covenant and the New Testament / the New Covenant under Jesus Christ. And they see really distinctive discontinuity between the people of God being Israel and the people of God being the church. A second view there we need to cover is covenantal theology or federal theology. So this view sees three primary covenants contained in the biblical revelation. So one, an eternal covenant of redemption or peace established between the members of the Trinity. And then two, a covenant of works established with Adam in Eden. And three, the covenant of grace first revealed to Adam. So also because this view sees one covenant of grace from Adam to Christ, an emphasis is placed upon the continuity between the Old Testament and the New Testament church. So Old Testament Israel and the New Testament church, and sees continuity and some connections between them instead of the dispensationalism seeing discontinuity by those who embrace this view. So the federal term, just briefly, is sometimes used for this covenantalism position and comes from the Latin word for covenant, being fedos, and there's the citation for where I got that information. We need to do a short aside here about Reformed Paedobaptists versus Baptists who both hold this covenantalism view. So you'll run across some Baptists who hold to covenant theology, and you'll run across some others like Presbyterians and some Anglicans and others who will hold to covenant theology but practice paedobaptism or infant baptism. So here's a short summary of how both would hold to covenant theology but articulate their application of covenant theology in different ways regarding baptism. So Reformed Paedobaptists, in their articulation of covenant theology, argue that the covenant of grace was established in each of the post-fall biblical covenants, so Noahic, Abrahamic, Mosaic, Davidic, and New. For them, the covenant of grace is one in substance, though distinct in administration. The strict continuity of the covenant of grace across the biblical post-fall covenants undergirds the continuing practice of infant baptism. So as I understand it, Reformed Paedobaptists who practice infant baptism say since Adam, and the Noahic, Abrahamic covenant and such, we're under one covenant of grace, the people of God, Israel, and the church. And so they stress continuity, the signs of that covenant entry, circumcision in the old, and paedobaptism in the new. And so they stress that continuity because they're under one covenant of grace. So early Baptists who embraced covenant theology or federal theology as their covenantalism view rejected the infant baptism application, so the practice of infant baptism, of covenant theology. Instead, they tended to view the covenant of grace as promised in the Old Testament as early as Genesis 3:15 and revealed in a progressive way through the various covenants. So they stress not continuity. So they're saying we're under one covenant of grace, but it was promised earlier, and then believers' baptism in the New Testament is the fulfillment of that and the ultimate kind of end of that, an application of right covenant theology for those who are Baptists and do not practice paedobaptism. So you can see Samuel Renhan, The Mystery of Christ, His Covenant, and His Kingdom for a Baptist who holds to covenant theology, articulating that view specifically. Also, Earl Blackburn, It Pleased the Lord to Make a Covenant of Grace, a critique of 1689 federalism. So another Baptist who holds to believers' baptism and rejects paedobaptism, but holds to a covenant theology view. And so I'll do the full citations of those books in the recommended resources section of this video as well, so you can go check those out. So now we're going to get into some middle course views. There are two given in Emerson and Stamp's book, and I'm also going to talk about the two primary ones in this video. First, a quote from Emerson and Stamp. Some Baptists have sought to chart a middle course between dispensational theology and Reformed covenant theology. So dispensationalism theology, holding to the discontinuity between the Old and New Testament or Old and New Covenant and Israel and the church, and covenant theology, which sees more continuity between the Old Covenant, New Covenant, between Israel and the church. And so first up is New Covenant Theology. So the basics of this covenantalism view is that it tends to reject the threefold covenant argument in classic covenant theology. So redemption, a covenant of redemption, a covenant of works, and a covenant of grace. Instead, these Baptist interpreters, so those who hold to a new covenant theology framework, focus on the historical biblical covenants themselves and argue for discontinuity of the new covenant from the Old Testament covenants, but without the dispensational scheme related to Israel. So they hold to discontinuity, but not to the scheme or dispensational scheme that's attached to dispensationalism for Israel, specifically ENT Israel, ethnic, national, and territorial Israel. So you want to dive more into that, see Wells and Zaspel, New Covenant Theology. I have that book cited in the resource section of this video, so you can go check that out if you want to dive more into the New Covenant Theology kind of framework view. The fourth view, kind of shared in Emerson and Stamp's chapter, is progressive covenantalism theology. So this view and this covenantal framework view and its Baptist interpreters, like New Covenant Theology, focus on the historical biblical covenants as progressively revealing the new covenant, accounting for both continuity and discontinuity. So middle of the road, bringing together this discontinuity view and continuity view. Progressive covenantalism theology kind of running the middle, having some aspects of continuity and some of discontinuity. The difference between this view and some other Baptist covenantal theology views is that in certain places where the others stress continuity, like the normativity of the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, including its Sabbatarian demands, progressive covenantalism stresses discontinuity, arguing that the Sabbath command was fulfilled and abrogated in the new covenant. So if you want more on this view, that's just the very briefest definition I can give it right there. You need to get into Gentry and Wellham's book, Kingdom Through Covenant. I'll fully cite the whole book in my resource section of this video. Also, I will plug right now, I have a full, much longer video, deep dive into progressive covenantalism as a view. So there's the thumbnail right there for the video. I'll make sure I link to it in the resource section and also in the description of this video if you want to go check out a much more exhaustive deep dive into progressive covenantalism as a theology, biblical theological framework. So this is kind of summary quote from Emerson and Stamps. For all of these options, there is a distinct change from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant. That's been the focus of their chapter and the focus of our video and the focus of why Baptists are Baptists and practice baptism and do other things the way we do it, is that relationship between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant and how Baptists see it and articulate it. This Baptist hermeneutic, that distinct change from old to new, gives rise to Baptist theology and practice as it pertains to baptism, communion, polity, and the role of the state, which are all Baptist distinctives and historic distinctives that are discussed in the next section of Emerson and Stamp's book. And I hope to do a series on Baptist distinctives real soon for my channel. And so those are worth studying, but they all give rise to what makes Baptists Baptists. So with that, and kind of teasing what you need to study next, which after historical foundations, Baptist foundations, you need to study Baptist historical distinctives. Here are some recommended resources if you want to dive into Baptist covenantalism views and go a bit deeper than we did in this video specifically. So first up, obviously, if you love this video, if you love this series, get Emerson and Stamp's book, The Baptist Vision, Faith and Practice for a Believer's Church. I loved it, read it. It inspired me to do this series. Fully recommend this as a great introduction to the Baptist faith, to Baptist distinctives, and Baptist practice in under 200 pages. It's really such a great resource. I already recommended it in the video, but there is the video I did on progressive covenantalism. So there's the thumbnail. I'll link to it in the description of this video, and I'll also put it up on the blog post, which I have for this series. So there's a blog post for this series. You can get abbreviated notes that I've been scrolling along the side, as well as links to all of these resources are on that blog post for the entire series. So the blog link is in the description of this video, and it'll include a link to this video I did on my channel on progressive covenantalism or New Covenant Theology, a biblical theological framework. If you want to dive more into dispensationalism, what it is, and some different things about it, you need to look into getting the book After Dispensationalism, Reading the Bible for the End of the World by Brian Irwin and Tim Perry. So there's the cover. It's 400 pages, and it was published in 2023 by Lexham Press. If you want to get more into covenant theology from a Baptist perspective, here are the two books that were recommended by Emerson and Stamps. First, The Mystery of Christ, His Covenant, and His Kingdom by Samuel Rinnan. 228 pages is how long that is. It's from Founders Press and was published in 2020. You also need to look into getting It Pleased the Lord to Make a Covenant of Grace, a critique of 1689 federalism by Earl Blackburn, which is 80 pages and published in 2023. I have other good recommended books. If you want a book on covenant theology from a Paedobaptist perspective, just comment below in the video, say, hey, Joe, what would you suggest? I might also put some of them up on the blog, but those are both covenant theology from a Baptist perspective books I'm recommending right there. Book, if you want to get into New Covenant Theology, the one that was recommended by Emerson and Stamps, you need to get New Covenant Theology, Description, Definition, Defense by Tom Wells and Fred Zaspel. It's 324 pages. This one might be harder to find because it was published in 2002, but it comes highly recommended. If you want a book on progressive covenantalism, the full academic defense of it, what the position is, you need to get Kingdom Through Covenant, a biblical theological understanding of the covenants, the second edition by Peter Gentry and Stephen Wellham. It is a big book, 960 pages. I'm showing you the cover right there. I personally have the ebook version from Crossway. I do not have this thick thing sitting on my shelf, but it's really good. I know people who have read it and have really enjoyed it, and I can fully recommend it to you guys. If you want something that gets into the basics of a lot of the covenantalism views that I just shared with you guys, you need to check out this book right here, Systematic Theology with a Progressive Covenantalism View. So this was written by Dr. Wellham. This is Systematic Theology from Canon to Concept, Volume 1. I recommended this in the video that we talked about Scripture because it talks about Baptist articulation of sola scriptura and the Baptist beliefs around the authority, inerrancy, and sufficiency of Scripture, because this is Volume 1 of what's supposed to be about a 3-volume systematic theology that Dr. Wellham's working on. But it pertains to this video because he's using a progressive covenant theology biblical framework to do his systematic. And so he spends time in this book talking about theology proper and the study of God, what Baptists believe about Scripture, and then he has a long section on progressive covenantalism and some of the other options. So covenant theology, dispensational theology, and so he summarized a lot of stuff that's in that 960 plus page book on covenant theology that he did with Gentry. He has put into this in abbreviated format. So this is probably the one to get right here, which is just over 1,000 pages from B&H Academic and published in 2024, because you get progressive covenantalism kind of stuff and summaries for all the dispensational or all the covenantalism views in one volume with some other helpful tools as well. So fully recommend that to you guys. And as I've already mentioned, I might put up some other good resources that either come out after I've published this video or you recommend to me in the list that is on my blog as well. So final encouragements, if you love this video and you haven't watched the entire series, so my entire series on Baptist foundations, there's the card right there, the playlist to the entire series. So go watch and enjoy. If you've watched all of those or you enjoyed this video and you want more content like this from me, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so you see me put out videos that help you read the Bible, help you read really great books, and have conversations like this one that I feel really matter for eternity, really matter when it comes to what you know and believe about God, what you know and believe about the Christian faith, about the Bible, and how it gets integrated into the Christian life. So with that, I've also put some playlist links in the description of this video to some other Baptist stuff that I plan to do in the near future or are already up on my channel. So there's a link to a playlist of all the Baptist content I've done across my channel, book reviews, Covenantalism views, anything Baptist related, it gets dumped into that playlist. I also have a playlist link for my Baptist Identity series that I plan to release real soon. So if you're watching this a few months down the road, that thing is up. Go to that playlist, enjoy those videos. And then also have a playlist and a series I plan to do real soon on Baptist distinctives. So the historical distinctives that make Baptists Baptists. Yes, some of those distinctives can be found in the Christian church and other places. But when you see them together, distinctively, those people are called Baptists, and capital B Baptists own that label and are glad to do so. So with that, this is Back to the Word. My channel exists to equip and encourage you to read the Bible, good books, and have conversations that truly matter. You want more content like that? Subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you love this video, this series, share it with someone. I would encourage you to do that. So until next time, continue to read, treasure, follow the Word. God bless, and I'll see you guys soon.